Hi everyone, welcome back to the Female Genius podcast. I am so excited that you're here today. If you're new, I am Jessie, and the Female Genius podcast is about all things nerdy and amazing and exploring topics that frankly occupy my mind, so probably statistically is occupying somebody else's, okay? And we talk about it through the lens of science and just thinking deeper about a lot of topics. It's a lot of fun, it's a lot of science, and I'm glad that you guys are here today to join me. Okay, guys, Mass is back. Married at First Sight Australia is now streaming in the UK. And now, if you have been a long-time consumer of the podcast, aka Simran and Simran, Simran and Garrett, let me not shout at Garrett. If you've been a long-time consumer of the podcast, you guys know that I love reality dating shows. I do not know what it actually, I do know what it is. I do know why I like them so much. I think, to me, they are just a perfect way to explore a topic I find so fascinating, which is the dynamics in romantic relationships. And I feel like Married at First Sight is the best one because it's the only one that digs deep, right? We're talking about attachment styles. We're talking about dating preferences. We're really confronting some of the most toxic traits that people inhabit and how they manifest and exist in certain relationships and how they can help correct and fix them. It's just the perfect mirror, perfect conversation starters. I love it. I love it. I love it. Love is Blind. Actually, honestly, all of the Netflix ones do not hit. Like, I watch them because they're interesting, but they don't hit. They feel so overproduced. The people just feel a little bit slimy. I don't know. And maybe it's because it's Married at First Sight Australia and the UK one I watch. Maybe it's like a cultural difference. Maybe I have an inherent bias against Americans. Anyway, Married at First Sight has been back. And this season, I'm not going to spoil anything, but one thing that has fascinated me so far this season is how quick the men are in making women the villains. Now, I've watched many Married at First Sights, okay? And I will not hesitate in saying when a woman is in the wrong or when a woman is victim blaming a man. And is it victim blaming? When a woman is putting all of the ownership and responsibility that she should actually take in herself on a man. But for some reason this season, the men are really taking the cake. Like, they're just not, I don't know if they're not socially aware, they're not emotionally aware, but there's this one guy who just without fail is really trying to gaslight all of us. Bear in mind, we're watching everything live-o, is really trying to gaslight all of us and himself that this woman, the kindest, nicest, warmest soul that he's been paired up with, is the villain in this situation. And it got me thinking, okay, about in society, in media, in film, what happens when women become the villains in our story? Why does he see this woman this way? Why is it a problem when women are more assertive and domineering and all of these kind of things? And I thought, well, it's International Women's Month. It's International Women's History Month. It's the Female Genius podcast. And what better topic to explore some of my favorite things, which is literature, movies, and neuroscience, to kind of explore why women are the villains. When women become the villains, why do we feel a certain way about it? And how can we as women, as a collective, come and band together to, support our women's villains? Because at the end of the day, I believe in women's rights and women's wrongs. I love that phrase so much. The funniest thing to me is going on TikTok or social media, and I don't know, a celebrity is just doing something crazy, like doing something that's traditionally like we would admonish or rip them to shreds back in the Britney Spears era. Like, if Britney Spears did this in 2008, we would have eaten her up. But now we're in the TikTok comments and it's like, a woman can't have hobbies? A woman having hobbies. Wow. I believe in women's rights and wrongs. She's just having a good time. Leave her alone. I think the last time I saw it is when Rachel Zegler, love her, by the way, was accused of being a Snow White that follows the snow, if you catch my drift. And then in the comments are like, well, women can't have hobbies? It's a hard job, guys. It's a hard knock life. Let her live. And I'm like, wait, hold on. I'm actually kind of here for it. Or like the whole thing where a woman is just like shouting or doing something crazy. And traditionally we would be like, oh, shut up, sit down. Like, go into your place. Women should be seen or not heard. And then in the comments we're like, that is so cunt. That is mubba. Like Charlie XCX in the Grammys dancing and singing with max auto-tune up, which people hated on Charlie XCX for doing, by the way, when that's what Travis Scott has been doing for years. Auto-tune on max with pants raining down the sky. Not pants as in trousers, but like pants as in underwear raining down in the sky. singing Guess the Color of My Underwear. And I'm like, she is so mother, she's so cunt, she's so brat, I just want to be like her. And I love that we can move forward today in this society. But anyway, without further ado, let's get into the main topic of the podcast: when women become the villains.
Female genius.
Okay, let's talk about some of my favorite female villains before we go into some of the science and some of the cool research that I found to you today. Guys, I love a female villain, okay? I was speaking about it before, I'll speak about it again, okay? I love female villains. I get so excited when there's one on my screen and when they're done so well. But what I find very interesting about various female antagonists, we're going to go into some of my favorites in a second, right, is that the way in which I perceive the female antagonists, whether I hate them or not, is solely dependent on what is the value in the social context of a woman or people in that society in general. So, for example, let's take Azula from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Azula is one of my favorite characters. She's bad. She's so bad. I love her. I love her. Like, there's not one moment in me where I'm like, oh, Azula, shut up. Oh, Azula, you're so bad. Ugh, get this girl. I never think that about Azula. Every time Azula's on my screen, I eat it up. I'm like, yeah, you know what? Okay, what? She's morally wrong, but she's so cool, right? Azula is a female antagonist in Avatar: The Last Airbender. She's a character that, you know, by traditional means, she's going against our protagonist. She's doing bad things. She's extremely cruel. She's vindictive. She's spiteful. But we still love Azula. Obviously, we can peg it down to aspects of them humanizing Azula as we go on throughout the show. But even in the first moment we see Azula, I've never hated the babe. I don't know about you. And I thought a little bit about why. In fact, when I spoke to a lot of my friends, they also don't hate Azula. And I think it's really interesting because Avatar: The Last Airbender, the value of a woman isn't inherently based off of the fact they are women, right? We have traditional, I guess, gender roles in some places within the Avatar universe, but in total or in general, right, the main value of a person, whether you're a man or a woman, the way we are perceiving when we watch Avatar: The Last Airbender is how well you can bend. If you have somebody that is a crazy good bender, we are going to value your presence in the series regardless. We are going to be in admiration of your skills because that is what we have been subconsciously socialized. Is socialized the right word? Unconsciously told to focus on as we are watching the show. That's not to say there aren't non-benders that we value. We love you, Sokka. You know, there are non-benders that we value, but inherently the whole basis of the show and the way we esteem value is, okay, is this person a good bender or not? And then obviously as we dig deeper into their storyline and as we keep going, right, we find other things to value about certain characters above their bending. But initially we're looking about how strong and how powerful they are, which is very interesting because when I flip back to one of the first female antagonists per se that I studied in a literary context, Lady Macbeth, by the way, Macbeth, I love Macbeth so much. I don't think you understand how much I love that Shakespeare play. I studied it. I think it's because of the school and the way I studied it, but I love Macbeth. I'm a Macbeth super fan. If they had Macbeth merch, I'd have the Stanley Cup merch and the jumper and the posters. That's how much I love Macbeth. Anyway, but obviously Lady Macbeth is positioned as almost the female antagonist alongside the witches in Macbeth, right? And obviously in the social context that Macbeth was written, for those of you that don't know, it was written in 1606, right? Written for King James I. It was kind of like an homage? Not an homage. An homage is not the right word. It was basically written for him, right? To like impress the king at the time. And obviously Shakespearean England, or in 1600s, that was a time where there were very, very strict and specific gender roles, right? There was a hierarchy in who held power in society, and women were traditionally towards the bottom. Women were expected to be quiet and subservient, super kind, have very traditional feminine traits, right? Things like being domineering or overly intelligent or overly outspoken or aggressive and cruel were extremely looked down upon when it came to a woman, to the point where if you displayed any of these traits in an outside environment, you would be labeled as a witch and burnt to the stake, right? Which then allows us to then position how we view or how the Shakespearean audience might have viewed Lady Macbeth in that time. While I initially read Macbeth and I thought, oh, Lady Macbeth, icon, she's so cool, right? a lot of people who were socialized in a very different context than I was might have read Lady Macbeth and thought, wow, this woman is evil. She's pure evil. I mean, look at her saying, oh, come to my woman's breasts and take my milk for gold, you murdering ministers, right? She's telling, hey, evil spirits, come to me and make my breast milk poison, right? That's how little I care about my femininity and how much I want to achieve this goal of killing someone. And we would look at Lady Macbeth as an agent of evil towards Macbeth's journey because we're rooting for Macbeth. Macbeth is our protagonist. We like Macbeth. We want him to make the right decision. And we see Lady Macbeth as steering Macbeth away from making the right decision. And I guess some people argue that Shakespeare paints Lady Macbeth to show us what happens when you give women too much power in society. When a woman's voice holds too much power, right, you end up with consequences like what happened in Macbeth, where he eventually goes crazy and he dies. Spoiler alert. So again, I think it's really interesting about the landscape of a movie or a book or a TV show can affect how we view female antagonists. And if we reflect that into our real world, the landscape in which we have been socialized to view women and the expected roles that we have when we view women also impact how we villainize women in society. If you have been raised to see women act and behave in a certain way, and you start coming across people in your life, or women in your life in particular, that don't act the way that you have been socialized to think that they act, right? You then start to paint them as villains. And in all honesty, sometimes women aren't the antagonists, but just because they oppose your worldview, you perceive them to be the villains in society. And that is truly a dangerous thing to play at and a dangerous thing to do. I mean, who else, before I get into it, who else are some of my favorite villains? Oh, bro, Cersei Lannister. Like, oh, do you want to, let's have a little ramble for a second. Cersei Lannister in Game of Thrones, I hate everything that she does. I do think she's wicked, but I like the way in which she does it. She does it in a way that would be traditionally masculine. So if a man did the things that Cersei did, and in fact, I think there's loads of men in the Game of Thrones verse that do things as bad as she does, right? If a man did what Cersei did, like, we would not like him, but it wouldn't be like a visceral distaste that some people I see on Reddit, on Twitter have for Cersei. I'm like, Cersei kind of bad. Bad because she's doing the wrong thing and I don't agree with her, but actually, hey, like, Cersei... And I think it's very interesting because, again, Game of Thrones almost has, again, like those traditional gender roles embedded into its society. And Cersei Lannister is a mother and everything she does is in the name of the children. But she deploys very, what we would call traditional masculine tactics to do so. It's so interesting to see. I mean, if we think about, the Bene Gesserit. Oh gosh, the Bene Gesserit. The Bene Gesserit from Dune. Dune is a very hard and complicated thing to explain. But the Bene Gesserit are basically this community of women, basically, that have gone on for a century-long plan to establish dominance and power within their society. And they use, like, mind control, science, their brains and sexuality to basically manipulate all of these powerful men so that the timeline and the things happening in the world go the way the Bene Gesserit want. They are like this hidden absolute power within the universe. And I eat it up. They are so cool, the Bene Gesserit. Like, the voice, it's so cool. To be honest, I don't really know. Bene Gesserit, I guess they are positioned as the bad guys, but the entire time I'm like, the men are kind of being really dumb though. Like, the Bene Gesserit, they be eating. That's another one I think is really interesting as well. I mean, if we talk about Tashi Duncan from Challengers, she's a really interesting one because she's both the protagonist, but she takes on very antagonist traits. And some of the feedback I saw, some of the commentary I saw after watching Challengers was that Tashi, this and that, and Tashi was so evil and wicked and blah, 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 blah. I can't believe she did this. But I have watched many movies where men have acted very similarly to Tashi, right? And we don't criticize them or hate on them. We're like, oh, damn, his sports injury drove him crazy. Why do we not have that same sympathy for Tashi? Again, I guess it's set in a real world, so we reflect it back to what our traditional societal roles should be. But I love Tashi Dunking, and separate from my love for Zendaya, like, the entire time she's like, oh, what's that scene where she's arguing with one of the boys, not the blonde one, the brown head one, and then they're arguing in the mirror, and then he's like, you're not a member of my fan club? Eats every time. So yeah, guys, please let me know in the comments on social media who are some of your favorite female antagonists. Those are some of my favorite, the ones that I've reflected on in the series. But now we're going to go on to think a little bit deeper as to potentially a neuroscientific reason to why that powerful women make people so uncomfortable. Why watching Cersei Lannister off all of those people makes you feel ugh. But then when a man does it, you're not as disgusted or made as uncomfortable by it. Why sometimes when we perceive female serial killers, we feel it more viscerally than how we perceive male serial killers. And all of these kind of things, because we are going to talk a little bit about left field, we're going to be talking about mirror neurons.
Female genius.
First of all, I'm going to quickly go down a little bit of a science rabbit hole to explain what mirror neurons are to you. First and foremost, mirror neurons are what you could potentially argue to be a new neuroscience discovery. I mean, I think it's only been in the past decade or so that scientists have really started digging deep into mirror neurons, and they absolutely fascinate me. So bear in mind, some of the research I'm talking about hasn't been studied at length. We don't really understand specific mechanisms about it, and people are actively studying it as we speak. So maybe if you were to watch this in 5 years' time, this information might be out of date, but I have linked the paper that I used to figure out what happens with mirror neurons and how this might contribute to our gender bias down below. So make sure you take some time to go and read that. But let me try and break it down for all of you in a way that we understand. So mirror neurons are a special type of visual spatial neurons, which basically means a connection between our spatial awareness and our visual sets, right? Which basically responds to actions in which we observe each other, right? So essentially what is happening, say that you see somebody smiling, our mirror neurons would fire or could fire in a way as if we are smiling ourselves, which helps us to understand the emotional context of a smile, right? So essentially they are what they do. We basically, mirror neurons mirror the actions that we see and perceive in our environment. They help with learning and imitating behavior, but they also help with the processing of emotional regulation and emotional intention, basically linking the parts of what they are doing and how we perceive it. For example, right, there was a scientific study done where volunteers were given hand actions without the context. So they just did various hand actions without context, and they also gave actions executed in context, so with information provided as to why that person was doing what they were doing, right? Actions that came with context caused selective activation in certain mirror neuron systems, suggesting that it might also help mediate our understanding of what other people are doing, right? And it's all linked in the studies below. In the context of social cognition and essentially processing social behaviors, right, we could argue that the way in which mirror neurons work can help us understand why some people feel so viscerally against women being powerful and occupying traditionally masculine roles. Because what is very important to understand is that our brain is heavily influenced by the society in which we live in. That being said, our cultural and social understanding, or the cultural social understanding in which we grow up with, will influence the context that we apply when we are activating our mirror neuron network. So, for example, when we see a woman acting in a specific way, our mirror neurons attempt to mirror this, what we call socially appropriate behavior. So let's say, for example, your mirror neurons basically attempt to mirror socially appropriate behavior. When a woman displays traditionally feminine traits, such as being overly kind and self-sacrificing and very nurturing, right? All of these aligning with societal expectations of femininity, our mirror neurons fire, and we basically are able to understand the social context because of the way we're socialized, right? This makes sense to our mirror neurons. However, when a woman steps outside of these traditional roles and exhibits traits associated with power, such as assertiveness or dominance, such as assertiveness, dominance, or competitiveness, mirror neurons might struggle to understand the context or to process these behaviors because they deviate from the expectation that they have been socialized to believe, which may lead to a sense of discomfort or confusion or even an aversion to powerful women, right? Which is some of the theories. Again, like I'm trying to string things along. This might not be the real case, but this is what science said so far, which I find very interesting. Number one, I think mirror neurons are so cool. I want to nerd out about it for like 50 minutes. I think they are incredibly fascinating. But I do think it's very important to understand, like I was talking about before, in terms of how our social context might affect the way we perceive things in literature and media and shows, or the social context in which the media or the shows for us into, right? Our mirror neurons in society, the way we perceive how women should act, right? It could also is very influenced by the way we were raised and the way we grow up. I think this is a very interesting point to consider when we speak about gender roles and the rise of red pill content on social media and all the scary things that are happening, essentially that women are becoming more left-wing and men are becoming more right-wing, and I could do a whole episode diving into that. But what I think is very interesting, and I think is very important for all of us to understand and take away, is the way which we perceive the world is heavily influenced by the social biases that we are fed when we are younger. And I do think we have an obligation as we move into adulthood to question our social biases and understand whether they are correct and not just hold them to be true just because that's what you were taught, right? And I think it's very important in education, in media we consume, in all of these things, that you are constantly reappraising and understanding, where does this bias that I have come from, right? If every time you watch a show, you hate a woman in the show, why do you hate this woman? We need to start asking ourselves questions. I don't think people question their behaviors enough. I think it's very important to understand that actually within this context that I have been raised and I expect women to act, I need to also understand that women aren't raised and socialized in the same context that I am, right? They do not have to apply to these rigid hierarchy of rules. I think it's so interesting to me because when I reflect a little bit on my childhood, I wasn't raised in a home that enforced very strict gender roles on me, contrary to my Nigerian background, right? My dad is a very soft-spoken man. He's really smart, but he's really gentle, right? He's like a kind soul. He's not like confrontational by any means. He's not that assertive. He just wants to live a peaceful life. His top priority is peace, right? My dad loves cooking. He always says that if he had another chance at life, or if he had more time, or if he had more money, he would open his own restaurant. He just loves cooking and just having a good time. Whereas when I grew up, right, my mom was very assertive. She was very dominant. If she had an opinion, you were going to hear her opinion, like loud. And she would not shy away from an argument. She was very honest. She was very fiery. She also loved cooking and homemaking as well, don't get me wrong. But it was very interesting to watch TV shows or go into primary school and hear the way that people talked about their mums or talked about traditional gender roles, because I was like, yeah, that's not how it works in my household, or for example, the idea, I remember being in primary school, I must have been in year 4, year 5, and then one girl must have said that her dream was to be like a housewife. And the idea of a housewife was so foreign to me. I remember being like, that's the most insane thing I've ever heard. And I went home and had a conversation with my parents about it, because I remember even till this day, right? My auntie she hates the idea of a housewife. She's like, why can't you go out and work? Is her whole thing. She's like, you need to go out and work. You need to learn a skill. You need to know how to make your own money, because if anything happens to your husband, or if your husband dies or God forbid loses his job, what's going to happen to you, babe? Are you going to stop living life? Is literally what she says till this day. I like the idea of a housewife could never come up in conversation around my family, because they would look at me like I'm crazy. But that's just the type of family I grew up in, where women were encouraged to be industrious and thinking and smart and read your books and do really, really well in school. I remember actually there was one time I was in Nigeria and I must have been for my brother's wedding. I haven't been to Nigeria since like 2019. We were in Nigeria and then we were seeing like, you have like aunties, uncles, like people, okay? People, grandma, aunties, uncles. I have like 7 different grandmas according to just the people that I call grandma, whatever. I remember one of them was talking to me. I must have been 16 at that point. And she was like, do you have a boyfriend? My dad, the Nigerian dad he is, because he still has those aspects, quickly jumps in and said, no, she doesn't do that. She doesn't have a boyfriend. And I laughed. And then my grandma, not really my real grandma, but like, she was like, at the time was like, that's not good. She needs to get a move on. And then, my auntie was like, okay, what do you want to do? And at the time I was 16, I was like, I'm either considering studying medicine or a science at university. I want to go to one of the top 3 universities in the UK, like for science. I want to go to Oxford, Cambridge, or Imperial. Like that is my standard. And then she was like, what do you want to do afterwards? I was like, I'm considering doing my master's and my PhD, or I might work for a little bit. And she dead ass said no. And I was like, what? And my dad was like, what? And because, again, my dad is always supportive and encouraging my academic pursuits, even till this day. The auntie was like, no, because if you earn too many degrees and, no man wants to marry a woman with a PhD, because then, you feel like you're above him. It emasculates him. You will never find a husband if you have a PhD. I remember my dad pulled me to the side after that conversation and he said, empty everything she told you out of your brain. You're getting that PhD, right? Even now when I graduated and I go to my auntie's house, not the auntie that I told you about, honestly, Nigerians and their auntie. I call everybody auntie. It's confusing. Okay. I went to an auntie's house. I don't know how else to describe her. Oh, because she's not like my biological auntie, but she's like an auntie. Yeah, okay. I went to an auntie's house, okay, and she was asking me my plans for the future. And I remember telling her, I'm considering either doing a PhD or going to do graduate medicine. Like those were my like the two biggest things in my brain. And I was like, either I do a master's and I go on to do a PhD, or I do graduate medicine. Like the doctor is going in front of my name was what I was telling her at the time. And she was like, when are you gonna get married? How long would that take you? And I said, well, all in total, if I do a master's and maybe I take a couple years out to work and then I go do my PhD, or if I do my master's and then I go do my graduate medicine course, it'll probably take around 5, 6, 7 years. And then she was like, when are you gonna get married? And I was like, I don't have a boyfriend, so it's not really on my schedule, on my timeline, and I don't really understand how that would affect my dreams and my goals. And she's like, no, because if you don't get married on time, like, you know, I see a lot of women doctors struggling to get, and it's just this whole narrative presented to me. And I was like, there's no way you would have ever, if I was a man, if I had a penis swinging between my legs, there is no way you would have said that to me. And I just have such an aversion of this idea of women watering down their potential ambitions and their goals all because of quote unquote marriage and things like that. And I actually had to confront like some of my biases against women who wanted to be housewives just because of the way I was raised and not understanding that actually this might be what some women just want for their lives. I had to confront those social biases. So why can't other people confront those social biases about women who are super focused on their career or want these types of things? Why is it considered negative, or they're going to regret it in the long term because they're going to be super duper lonely and all of these other negative traits? Like why am I becoming the villain in this Nigerian story? Like why is me having a PhD going to make me less desirable and less attractive? It's so confusing to me. Not only that, right? I am very outspoken, okay? I'm an intelligent babe. I am very outspoken. I will say my piece. I will say my business. Take it or leave it. You know, I'm blunt. I'm honest. That's just who I am. Obviously, sometimes to the point of rudeness, but my friends check me when that needs to be checked because I'm not perfect. But yeah, like blunt, like I'm on the thing. And I've been called so many things in my life. I've been called a bitch. I've been called bossy. I've been called all of these things. But I was like, actually, I've not said one unkind thing to you. I'm just very clear about where I stand in my opinions. And if I observe a male counterpart of mine doing the same things, you do not associate the same traits, right? You do not say, you're too much for me. You know, I've never heard a girl go to a man and say, you're too much for me because you are so strong in stating your opinion. It's absolute craziness to me, right? And so I think it's important because while you can say, yes, these mirror neurons are fixed and they've stopped, I'm 25, I have all of these pathways already set. One thing that's very important about your brain, I've said it before and I'll say it again, your brain is plastic. Okay, not as literal water bottle plastic. Basically, what I mean is through cognitive reappraisal, through journaling, through confronting some of your social biases, you can change the way your brain thinks. Your brain isn't fixed and stuck. Okay, throughout your whole entire life, you can change the way you think and you reappraise things and your reactions to things. It takes work, but it's possible. So I think it's so important that actually now that you've listened to this, start confronting your social biases. And they don't even have to be this big, grand expenditure, right? It could be watching a show and you realize, wow, why do I really hate this woman? And maybe having a conversation with a friend about it and recognizing, actually, I do have this thing against women who are very outspoken. Okay, maybe I should start thinking and questioning myself on that. Questioning yourself is enough to start getting those brain neurons and those pathways moving in different ways. I'm so passionate about this because I don't understand why people feel so set and stuck in their ways. And that's how we come to villainize women. That's how women are ripped to shreds by tabloids and on social media by doing something that men have done for ages, right? What happens when we put women against other women and they're so competitive and they're butting heads? Why do we have to do that when we can work together to bring what we want in society? It's so baffling to me. It's so baffling.
Female genius.
Overall, you know, in this whole episode, we've talked about some of my favorite female villains and thinking about how actually maybe the context of the media that we are consuming influences how we perceive these villains. We've spoken about some of the neuroscience pathways that might underpin the way we view women and some of the gender biases we've had. I've spoken a little bit about the way I perceive the world and how I was raised, and the importance of actually understanding that you can change the way you think, okay, in any circumstance, right? It's not set in stone, but the realization is the hardest part. Okay, and now I think I want to leave off with an encouraging message to my girly pups, to my girls, okay, to all of those people who identify as women, right? We are a collective community. And even though people have biases, even though people are like, there are people with shotguns ready to villainize you and take you out just for taking up space, you need to take up the space, guys. Dream so big without fear of being judged, right? Or without fear of never being loved. Because in my personal opinion, right, if you are so concerned about your dreams affecting your desirability to the opposite sex and how you might end up settling down or anything, why would you ever want to be married to someone or attached to somebody for life who does not value your dreams and uplifts them? You know, I always say this thing again and again and again when it comes to, I don't know, I'll speak to my little cousin and she's like, oh, but you know, what if, like, you know, my future husband finds my nose ugly? I said, why are you even wanting a future husband that's finding you ugly? Wouldn't you want the person you go after to find you beautiful? Do you get what I mean? So I really, really encourage women to take up as much space as you want, exist as freely and as loudly as you want to be in a way that doesn't harm other people, may I add. And to, you know, take up space on tables, to let your voice be heard in rooms. Do not shy away and shrink at the back of a classroom if you have a question. Put your hands up and be okay to take up space, to get wrong, to learn, to engage with your learning. At work, stop apologizing for so many things. Okay, say what you mean. Ask your male coworker, hey, pick up the slack because I'm doing a lot of the work that you should also be doing. Be expressive without fear of being labeled a bitch, you know? Because at the end of the day, regardless, for you to get what you want in life, you have to be perceived, right? And you can't control that perception to some degree, right? As long as you are a kind person, and I believe this for both men and women, as long as you operate with kindness and empathy, if for some unknown reason, right, whatever table you want to try and take up space with, they won't let you take up space because of who you are as a person, right? Do not dim your light. Don't try and shrink yourself to squeeze onto the table, right? Go and make a fucking new table. Like, do you know what I mean? Make a new table and start inviting all of those women that want to take up space and, you know, exist freely as themselves. I encourage us as girls and women to not put ourselves against each other and compete with each other. Oh, this girl's a pick me and this one is this one and you're not feminine enough to be a woman and all of these, whatever. Like, I don't, whether you believe feminine women, pick me women, football women, group, blue, green, pink, purple, I don't care, right? But at the end of the day, these are women and we should support these women's dreams and goals, no matter what they would be, with the exception that they're not harming people. I feel like I have to do the disclaimer before somebody's like, what if a woman wants to be a serial killer? Let's not be stupid here, okay? I just genuinely think that if you see a girl struggling, right, we should pick her up. Don't, like, you know, if you're on Twitter nitpicking what a celebrity is doing or wearing and, oh, her boobs must be thick. What's your own, right? She looks amazing. Why don't we switch from saying things like that? And if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. You know what I mean? Encourage women, uplift women, encourage women to take up space as they want to take up space, okay? Understanding that not everybody has the same social context and worldview, and understanding that, hey, some women do want to be homemakers and that's completely okay. But hey, some women want to be doctors and that's completely okay in itself. And we should encourage all of those traits. I hope you guys have a lovely International Women's History Month. If you're a man, I hope you take this on board and think about, are there any way that I'm villainizing the women in my life and I'm not even realizing it, you know? And also understand that women can exist in multitudes, you know? Somebody could want to be a doctor and want to have children as well. You know, a woman can be kind and assertive. A woman can be kind and dominant, right? A woman can be smart and want to just go out and listen to Charlie XCX and have a really good time and have a great party. A woman could wear a short skirt and be smart and intelligent. A woman can wear a short skirt and be a virgin and want to be waiting for marriage. Like, people can exist in multitudes. We are not monoliths, right? I really hate the stratification of, oh, clean girl, feminine girl, this one, that one. We can be whatever we want to be and however we want to take up space. I hope you loved this episode. I hope you enjoyed this rant. I really loved thinking and researching and talking about this episode. Make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe. Follow in wherever you listen. And I will see you guys next time on the Female Genius podcast.
Female Genius.